guys, here's a quick tutorial on making a watercolor orange using masking fluid. And here I'm just going to go over some of the different ways that we can use masking fluid to create texture. I'm using Memory Blue watercolors, so primary yellow, primary cyan, and primary magenta, as well as cadmium orange, orange red. But you can use whatever colors you have. And then I'm using Arches 640 GSM paper. It's quite expensive, but it means that I can do all of these layers. Basic steps. First, I'm going to do a light wash of the colors showing up in the highlights. I'm going to reserve those highlight areas by putting masking fluid on dry paper next. I'm going to put in another wash of color and then another layer of masking fluid. And finally take all of that off to reveal the completed effect. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a fairly detailed drawing of the orange. The highlights are really key here. So you want to place the main forms of the orange down, the main forms of volume, so that you can correctly figure out where to put the highlights. And then I'm coming in with just a really pale wash of very, very light red with some yellow mixed in. And I'm coming in with purples for the areas that are a little bit further away from the light in the wider section of the orange. I'm creating a gray out of those three primary colors, so cadmium red, orange, and blue. And once that dries, I'm placing down the masking fluid in the areas where the highlights are going to come through. And I know that as this paint dries, it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. Now I'm coming in with a richer amount of color, so creating a brown using those three primaries and adding in some purples for the shadow. I can then add in a richer mixture of orange using that cadmium orange hue as well as the primary magenta and primary lemon. And that's going just straight over the masking fluid, and then I'm doing a wet on wet drop in of some darker areas of red. So remember to darken the red. You can just add a little bit of blue to your orange. And here I've wet the paper, I'm just placing the paint side by side. I'm not letting it really bleed out of this particular section. You want to reserve that space, so just wet the section of the orange on the inside, section by section as you paint. And now doing a wet on dry wash, I'm coming in with the details of the skin around the orange. I'm moving back in and making those shadows a little bit more severe with some purplish orange. And basically the white flesh of the orange isn't really white in many areas. It kind of grays as it moves into the shadow. So I'm just being creative with the colors that I'm using and really focusing on my reference as I come in and add different tints to different sections. I'm coming in with a second layer of masking fluid to do some of the details that are going on underneath the flesh of the orange. So there are some veins that I can see. They're not quite the highlights, but I'm going to put down that masking fluid, not just because I'm going to do another layer, but because I know that it's going to lift off a little bit of the paint I've already put down. So masking fluid, as well as reserving a space, can also kind of take off paint. It really, it depends how you're working, but often it'll take off a little bit of paint. Just reinforcing those values, creating a bit of a darker border here. I really want the contrasts here to pop. So now I'm coming in with those little teardrop segments in the flesh of the orange, just following that pattern and being very mindful of the volume of these forms and how they relate to where I've placed the highlights. Letting that dry, really carefully coming back in with the shadow. So I like to save the part where we take off the masking fluid for last, just because it's really fun. And then finally, I'm ready to take off the masking fluid. I can add in, more detail at this point. I'm doing washes over some areas of the highlights where they're a little bit darker. But yeah, here's how you go about doing an orange.